Hello everyone, I'm Keith Platfoot with Kviation, and today we're going to look at logging simulator time in Smart Logbook. So we're starting off here on the main screen of the app. You can see we've logged one flight so far, and you can see that above that flight we have a warning about our instrument currency. So the built-in rule in Smart Logbook uses the FAA requirements for instrument currency, which are that we've logged 6 instrument approaches and 1 holding procedure in the last 6 months. Now we can actually log these instrument approaches in an FAA approved simulator. So let's imagine that's what we wanted to do here in Smart Logbook. How would we do that? So we're going to start by tapping the plus button at the top, just as if we were adding a normal flight. And this opens up the flight editor. And we need to mark this entry as a simulator and not a real flight. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the field for simulator. Now this field is not visible by default, but if we tap add and configure fields here at the bottom, we can turn that on. So we scroll down and find simulator in the list. And when we return to the flight editor, you can now see that we have a box here for simulator. So let's check that. And now this entry will be recognized as a sim session. Now when logging simulator time, we generally don't want to use these default built-in durations, for example, total, or for example, pilot and command. So what we want to do instead is probably log a specific simulator duration, and there's a field built in for that. So if we tap add duration and we scroll to the bottom again, we can turn on the simulator duration field, and this is actually where we want to log our sim time. So let's do that now. Let's say we had 1 hour of time in the sim, and we also need to log those instrument approaches. So let's tap add approach and log those. Okay, let's say we logged a bunch of RNAV approaches. So let's go ahead and bump that up to, we did all 6 to get our currency. And we also did the 1 holding procedure that we need. Okay. Next, let's go down here and just like a flight, we also have a remarks field. Let's go ahead and add a remark in here, just noting that this was for instrument currency. Perfect. Okay, and the last thing we're going to set here on this entry is the aircraft model up here at the top. Now, just like flights, it's useful to specify the aircraft and aircraft model that we use. So let's tap this, and we're going to need to add a new entry for the simulator. So we can give this, give this a generic name here to represent a simulator aircraft. And now let's specify the model details. Again, we're going to add a new entry here to represent the simulator model that we flew. And let's say in this case we flew an FMX from Redbird. Okay. Now we also want to make sure we check the box for simulator/flight training device. And furthermore, we can specify what type of simulator this was. Whether it's an FFS, an FTD, or in this case, an ATD. Okay, so we've specified that. Let's go ahead and tap done and return back to our entry. And now tap done to save this. So you can see here now our simulator entry showing up on the list. There's no route because this was just sim time. Let's go ahead and see now how this time shows up. So let's open up the total screen, and we're going to do that by tapping to open the menu and then selecting totals. Now you'll see by default that the sim time we just logged is not actually showing up here by default. We're only seeing the flight time from that lone flight. Now we can change this by tapping the filter description up here, the all flights to date. And this opens up the filter editor, where if we expand the aircraft section, we can see that the totals are filtered to only include time from real aircraft, but we can change that to include simulators as well. Okay, now we tap Apply Filter, and this takes us back to the total screen where we can now see that we do have that 1 hour of sim time, and we have those instrument approaches that we logged in the sim. Now if we go back to the flight list here, you'll see that we still have that warning about the instrument currency, even though we've logged those approaches we needed. So let's tap into this and fix that. So when we look at the instrument currency definition here, you can see that, like the total screen, this is also filtered to only include flights by default. But we can tap Edit at the top right and change that. So here in the editor, we're going to go down to the filter field, tap that, and similar to how we did on the total screen, we're going to change this filter so it includes both real aircraft time and sim time. And we're going to save this updated currency rule. And you can see that once we made that edit that we now are current again. We have those 6 instrument approaches and 1 hold that we did in the sim. And when we go back to our flight list, that error about our currency has now disappeared. So another thing to talk about for simulator time is how do these entries show up when you print? So in Smart Logbook, we have a number of print formats, and you can see those here in printing and reports. There's a number of formats for different countries. So let's take a look at a few of these and see how SimTime works when we print our logbook. So first up, we're going to look at the Jeppesen format here. This is commonly used in the United States. And you can see our entry here on the first page of that, the instrument currency in the remarks there. And if we go to page 2, this is where we're going to see the actual sim time over here in the dedicated flight simulator column. You can also see a few columns over those instrument approaches and the hold that we logged in the sim. If you go all the way to the right, you'll notice, of course, that that sim time is not showing up here in the total duration of flight column. And that's because we left the total duration field in that entry blank. And so that did not count towards our total time. If we move on to another format here, let's take a look at the EASA format, which is commonly used in Europe. Now on this one, we actually don't see that entry on the first page at all. And that's because sim entries are only going to show up in these columns over here in group 11. And so we see here we have the date, we have the type, and we have the time. You'll also notice, just like with the Jeppesen format, if we go back to page 1, that we do not have the sim time showing up here in total time of flight. Again, this is because we left that total duration field blank. So let's move on and take a look at the Transport Canada format. So similarly here, we can see on the first page that entry for the simulator does show up. But again, as you'd expect, that time does not show up here in the grand total, which is only for flights. And if we go to page 2, we can see that that time actually shows up here in the instrument group under the sim column. And we can also see right next to that the instrument approaches that we logged in the sim there. Lastly, let's take a look at the FAA 8710-1 report. Now this is a way to print your totals for IACRA applications. Basically, it shows your overall pilot time in various categories. And if we look at this report, we can see that the rows here each represent a different aircraft category. So For example, our flight that we logged is showing up here in the airplanes row. The simulator entry is going to show up here in these rows at the bottom, and they've got a row for each of the types of simulators. So this is a good reason, as I mentioned earlier, to specify the exact type of sim that you're logging time in. So when this is used potentially later on, for example, this report, you've got that accurately categorized. Now in our case, we logged the 1 hour in the ATD, so that's where that shows up here. And that's it for this format. And lastly, I'll just mention the DGCA format, which is the format used for India. Now this format does not actually include simulator time, so it's going to be filtered out when you print. So if for some reason you do want to include simulator entries in your DGCA printed logbook, you just need to log those as actual flights and not check the box for simulators. As before, you do want to make sure that anything you log in that entry is something that you want to be included when you print and on your total. So just be sure to kind of set the fields appropriately so that that happens. But that's about it for simulators in Smart Logbook. If you have any questions about this or anything else, feel free to shoot us an email at feedback@thesmartlogbook.com, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thanks.